Good day, everyone. Lane Nordland here with the Western Ag Network, and welcome to the latest edition of Fencelines and Headlines. Joining us all the way from the basement in which he calls his home office, yeah, just like me, is Mr. Russell Nimitz. Mr. Nimitz, how's your day going?
Yeah, pretty good. In all honesty, Paul Humphrey and I here in Billings, we have kind of some loudness going on outside as the Blue Angels and other military aircraft are flying all over Billings these past couple of days in preparation for the big air show taking place at the Billings Logan International Airport. Certainly kind of a fun sight because we don't get to see those like military aircraft unless you live near an Air Force base like other people. But it's something to see the Blue Angels, that's for sure.
Yeah, the joys of living a few miles from the Malmstrom Air Force Base, and you get the Black Hawk helicopters coming low. It's great when you're horseback and you're like eye level up on a ridge with one of those Black Hawk helicopters, or when the reserve guys are flying their big old cargo planes 30 feet
Yeah.
above your house. And I'm not complaining because they'll probably put a beacon on our place and fly over more, but it's just something you live with, kind of like Endangered Species Act stuff. Ranchers have kind of had to live with that. That's going to be one of our stories today, by the way. We're going to talk about the Endangered Species Act and why cattle and sheep producers would like to see that updated. That's going to be at the end of our program, Russ, but a lot of top headlines impacting farmers and ranchers, not only in Western Ag Network country, but across the nation, occurred this past week. One of those that we've talked quite a lot about is the right to repair efforts that groups like the National Farmers Union and state farmers unions have been advocating on for quite some time. We're going to see how the EPA, which some of our headline stories, farmers are frustrated with the EPA. Well, they're going to like the news that came out of the EPA here this week. Also, Russ is going to share an update on the Antiquities Act designation that occurred this week as well. And of course, we're going to put a little salt on it with one of my salty segments. I think everybody can get on board with what I'm going to be salty about here today. Also, a letter was sent from USDA Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack to his counterpart in Brazil pertaining to Brazilian beef. Probably not what you want to hear coming from this letter in anticipation of Brazilian beef imports. That's coming up at the end of our show. And again, maybe what I found on Instagram this week that should have farmers and ranchers giggling, maybe LOLing a little bit here in a little bit. But a lot of top headlines to get through here today, Russ.
Yeah, I mean, as always, it was another busy news week for sure. And as always, we're just going to scratch the surface on today's program, but we always try to pick out some of the bigger headlines that we think are impacting farmers and ranchers across our region. And of course, in addition to the ones that you just mentioned, I mean, obviously the other big headline for farmers in our neck of the woods is harvest continues to progress rather nicely. I mean, the winter wheat harvest is nearing completion as combines continue to roll through states like Montana and the Dakotas on the winter wheat. And a little bit of spring wheat harvest is underway in places like South Dakota and Montana. That'll be hitting full swing here shortly, as will the pulse crop harvest. So definitely an important time of the year for farmers in Western Ag Network country.
No, very true. And again, as I mentioned, one of those top issues that really has agriculture groups split right now that is that right to repair efforts. The farmers unions on the state and national level truly been leading that push, and the Environmental Protection Agency has affirmed farmers' right to repair in a letter sent to the National Farmers Union. The EPA said that the Clean Air Act cannot be used as a basis to restrict independent repair of farm equipment. National Farmers Union's Mike Strands said tractor manufacturers have been using language from the Clean Air Act to push back against right to repair legislation.
One of the arguments that has been made in opposition to allowing farmers the right to repair is that these equipment manufacturers have invoked EPA regulations, particularly the Clean Air Act, as justification for their need to control and restrict repair. The thought being, I guess, that tampering or altering emissions control systems would result if farmers were given the right to repair.
As a result, the National Farmers Union asked the Environmental Protection Agency for clarification on the point.
We got a letter from EPA Administrator Michael Regan talking about how the importance of right to repair is there, and that using the justification that emissions control systems would be in jeopardy if farmers were allowed the right to repair just doesn't stand up as something with the Clean Air Act. So it was good to get that clarity from EPA that using the Clean Air Act as an excuse for not allowing farmers the right to repair just doesn't hold water.
Now, Russell, the National Farmers Union also said they'll continue to support a federal legislative solution that guarantees farmers and independent mechanics the right to repair farm equipment on fair and reasonable terms and cost. This past legislative session, states across the nation introduced right to repair bills. And I know Montana had one, and that was not successful. But Colorado passed a right to repair legislation that was pushed forward by the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union and support of all the farmers unions across the nation as well. So very interesting to just look at this aspect of the right to repair. And again, it's a very sensitive topic, and it's one that truly does have manufacturers, implement dealers, and farmers really questioning what is the correct way to repair it, and how should we repair this equipment that is so important to us in the countryside.
Well, absolutely. And, in our visits with state farmers union presidents like Montana's Walter Schweitzer, they also want to make it very clear that, with bills like right to repair, they're not pointing the finger at their local implement dealers or local mechanics or anything of that sort. What they're really trying to do is wrangle up the equipment manufacturers, as you mentioned, and try to really figure out how do we move forward in the 21st century where a lot of these farm equipment, tractors, combines, swathers, you name it, are being controlled by computer chips and whatnot. And it really changes the way on how mechanics can, fix broken down equipment. And, time is money when this equipment is broke down. And a lot of times if there's a thunderstorm rolling in and you have some hay down, or you're trying to get that last few acres of, your crop harvested, you can't afford to be broken down. And I think that's what the farmers union folks and a few others are really getting at, is they just want the ability to fix and repair when a piece of equipment is down and not have to rely 100% on being a computer software expert.
Again, we'll continue to follow stories just like this here on the Western Ag Network and keep you up to date, because it is important for farmers and ranchers, and that's why we share these top headlines. Hey, Russ, let's take a quick break, but when we come back, Russell Nemitz will be talking about agriculture's reaction to a presidential monument designation that occurred this past week. We're going to hear a quick message from our friends at Ag Risk Advisors. We'll be back right after this.
Ready for a real PRF partner?
He was willing to track us for a year and provide that data back to us for a year. That's a guy making a pretty big investment.
At Ag Risk Advisors, this isn't our first rodeo. We are one of the most experienced in pasture rangeland forage. Honesty, commitment, trust. Many companies use these words. At Ag Risk Advisors, we earn them.
Again, a big thank you to our friends at Ag Risk Advisors. And just a reminder that the At the Table with Ag Risk Advisors podcast shares a lot of information and vital details for farmers and ranchers looking for risk management tools that just help them stay in business and helps keep risk management on top of mind. I actually get an opportunity to be a part of some of those shows and host a few of them. Just check out agriskadvisors.com for more. Well, Russell, before the break, we were talking about the Antiquities Act, and it's appearing once again in the Western Ag Network headlines this week.
Yeah, it sure is. We've been talking a lot about burdensome federal regulations here of late, whether it be the waters of the U.S. or WOTUS or even the Endangered Species Act, which, as you mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit more about even in this edition of Fencelines and Headlines. But the 1906 Antiquities Act, back in our headlines. And this week, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association slammed President Biden's recent use of this piece of legislation to put sweeping federal designations on over 1 million additional acres of land in Arizona, in which NCBA says amounts to nothing more than another presidential land grab. Now, I had the opportunity to visit with NCBA's president-elect, Mark Isley from Cheyenne, Wyoming, about this.
Well, the Antiquities Act, which dates back to 1906, was really useful. It has a place where you want to save tribal or cultural things of specific nature, specific historical significance. These have basically turned into full-scale land grabs. And the worst part of that is there's absolutely no input from local economies, no analysis of anything economic, no input from stakeholders like public lands ranchers or natural resource managers. And it does not fool the rule of law, and it doesn't follow the spirit of how this was originally developed.
He explained what NCBA is doing to prevent further abuse of the Antiquities Act, whether it be the Biden administration or future administrations of either political party.
Of course, we're trying to work directly with the administration. That's not as very effective. We're also getting state lawmakers and their particular committees, resources, natural resources, those sort of energy committees, to have some pushback and trying to make also the rest of the general public that has hiking and biking and hunting and all those other activities aware this could limit their access and their ability to use those lands. Certainly, any of the agencies that see things like fire protection and the control of those fuels.
And he said the unfortunate reality of designating new national monuments through the Antiquities Act is once the designation is made, it's tough to have it reversed.
It's extremely difficult. 80% of Arizona is already controlled by the feds, and anybody who has been stewarding this land, some for several generations, they're going to be locked out with no say. And some of the folks along the Utah border are going to be affected because they won't have access to their private lands either. And so basically this is a land grab of enormous proportions, unwarranted and really not covered by the law.
And Lane, it's pretty amazing what power a president can really have and just how they can change a lot of different things out here in farm and ranch country with the stroke of a pen. And of course, it's not just the Biden administration that has used the Antiquities Act over the years. I mean, it's been used or abused, however you want to look at it, from presidential administrations from both Republicans and Democrats over the years. And it's concerning to a lot of folks, though, as we move further and further in time, just the lack of public and local input, especially from farmers and ranchers that, is being given, I guess. And whether it's the Antiquities Act, I mean, a lot of folks are also feeling the same way here recently about the BLM's recent new conservation rule, which of course impacts a lot of public lands ranchers as well.
Yeah, a lot of those federal lands ranchers are pretty salty over that. And that leads us into our next segment. What made Lane salty this week? Russ, what made me salty this week and all the time is when you're driving on your county road or the back roads. I live on a gravel road, and you see stuff that when people just dump their garbage off in people's driveways, or this is what I found at the bus stop on the back way that we take. It's actually the bus stop. Our post office box is located there too. Somebody just decided to drop off their lawnmower. They couldn't, dispose of it correctly. And I saw that. I had a load of drywall in the back of my pickup, so I couldn't do anything about it at the time. So I took that road back 2 days later, and it was still sitting there. So I picked it up and I disposed of it properly. But what gives people just the right to just go trash, federal lands, public lands, or private ground and just dump their garbage everywhere? That gets me salty.
Yeah, and rightfully so. I mean, It's amazing to me just how lazy people are truly getting. I mean, you guys are like anywhere else. I mean, there's public, dumps that they could easily take it to, or somebody, they surely know even somebody that if they can't get it there, somebody, even like yourself, would gladly take it to the dump to get properly disposed of versus just leaving it alongside the road, whether it's a lawnmower. I mean, we have some beautiful landscapes out here where we get to call home. And you're right. I mean, nothing just makes them look terrible than people being lazy and throwing their trash, whether it's a lawnmower, pop cans, beer cans, cigarette butts, whatever.
Well, and
Just
they
out,
weren't cutting
out the
that.
window.
They weren't cutting that wheat field with that. So no,
It's
that
probably a good thing. It probably started on fire anyways.
yeah, that got me salty. And yeah, we have so much trash that blows in from all the developments to the west of us and whatnot that are on the edges of town there. But I mean, that stuff still blows. And regardless, people that litter leave their trash right along the side of the road because they're too lazy to take it to the dump or the disposal sites. That's what gets me salty. But yeah, maybe this
Well,
PSA will get people to be more proactive.
let's hope so. Let's hope so. Stay with us. We have a lot more headed your way on fence lines and headlines right after these messages from our friends at NCBA.
When it comes to the beef business, there's no room for gray area. The decisions being made in Washington affect the future of the beef industry, the livelihood of your fellow farmers and ranchers. Your National Cattlemen's Beef Association knows there's what benefits cattlemen and there's what doesn't. Visit ncba.org to learn more.
Returning back to fence lines and headlines here today on the Western Ag Network. We're talking about imported beef from Brazil. That probably just got your attention if you're tuning in here today on YouTube, Facebook, or on the audio podcast on Linecast Ag podcast platforms. But this week, Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack has urged his Brazilian counterpart to address timely disease reporting of cases of diseases like atypical bovine spongiform encephalopathy or BSE in the country of Brazil in order for Brazil to continue to access the U.S. food market. In his letter, Vilsack highlighted the responsibility of the U.S. and Brazil to both protect cattle herd health, but he did not close the country's access to the U.S. marketplace. U.S. Cattlemen's Association President Justin Tupper spoke with our Rachel Gable on the matter, and he said that in a recent call with the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and RCAP USA, these three groups made clear their concerns to the secretary about Brazil. But Tupper said, based on the secretary's letter, he showed some concern, but it did not reach the level of urgency communicated by cattlemen.
Brazil has proven time and time again of being a bad actor in the marketplace. And with the forced labor they use, the deforesting of rainforests, they can produce it at a level that is so much cheaper than ours. So it's an unfair advantage to Brazil in the marketplace. Plus the safety issues that come into play that, if they're going to be a bad actor and not report and not, do the things that we have to do as producers over here, we just think that it should be halted immediately until they want to play on the same playing field we do.
Now, following Brazil's most recent delay in reporting of an atypical BSE case back in February, that was 35 days delayed from being reported from first being discovered. Sen Mike Rounds, a South Dakota Republican, and John Tester, a Montana Democrat, reviewed their bipartisan legislation to suspend Brazilian beef imports to the U.S. until a robust review of the commodity's impact on food safety and animal health occurs. That bill was introduced and assigned to the Senate Agriculture Committee back in February 2023, and there it still remains. And Russell, I want to remind our viewers that we've been covering this story for quite some time. We even sat down with the Secretary of Agriculture back in March and asked him about this, and we actually put together a new story that aired a week ago, And on this same topic, we had another South Dakota producer, Todd Wilkinson, president of NCBA, share his frustration that the USDA secretary would not even answer their phone call. Well, he did answer their phone call not long after that, it seems, and then wrote a letter to USDA. So it does seem that the cattle groups finally got the attention of the secretary again on this matter, but they're still frustrated because all cattle groups, it doesn't matter what group it is, RCAF, NCBA, U.S. Cattlemen's, they all agree that there should be a halt to imports or a full-out ban on those imports. And it just seems that it's politics just playing out and a little bit of fluffiness with it.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate reality is what you said. I mean, politics is dictating so much of what's coming out of Washington, D.C. here of late. And you know, that political fight or political maneuvering has real impacts and real effects on the ground farmers and ranchers across America. And you're right, we spoke directly to Agriculture Secretary Vilsack earlier this year. And as we've shared time and time again on programs like this, his concern is we've got to be very careful that we don't set a double standard up for America when we look at ourselves and compare ourselves to other countries around the world. But the reality and the opinion is very loud and very clear from farm and ranch country. We're not worried about the double standard effect out there. We just want to have safe beef to offer our consumers across this country, and more importantly, keep our domestic livestock herds safe and healthy from foreign animal diseases.
No, very, very well said. And you know, Russ, this obviously is an international matter. Well, our Instagram find of the week takes us on the international scale. Russell has no idea what I'm about to show him here today, but I found this on Instagram this week, and it takes us to Scotland, where the UCI World Championship bicycle racing contest, I guess if we can call it that, was taking place in Scotland. And they had a very ingenious way to put a billboard out there for bikers to see. Yes, that is a herd of Scotch Highland cows, and that is a onesie that they put on these cows
Oh my goodness.
to promote Santee cycling wear. Now, Russ, there's a lot of cattle out in Western Ag Network country that are located next to highways. Could this be the big money maker? Should we start our own cow onesie billboard company?
I like the way you're thinking, and I had never seen something like this, but it's pretty ingenious. I will have to give them that. And I can't help but think, you know, we have the Montana Hereford tour coming up. We have the Montana Angus tour coming up. And oh boy, we could sure open a can of worms with this one.
Well, I found more information on this. CTV News interviewed the Scottish farmer Ewan Macmillan, and he said that it was quite the process to put this on. There was Velcro underneath the belly. That was a little bit difficult, he said. It was a two-person job, and by the time they were done doing the last cow there, they said they were quite experts at it. But this was the first the first one was a bit of a botched job, and we just shook bags and put feed by the road to keep those cows there. But yeah, Scotch Highland cow billboards. I think I'm going to have to start a company that does that so I can retire from being a farm broadcaster.
I can't help but think, I wonder what like Daryl Stevenson and Jack Holden would look like, you know, putting a onesie on some of their critters.
You would probably have to entice them with some adult beverages, and then they'd probably be really on board. Or who could do it better, a Hereford or an Angus guy? I don't know. That's the question.
It could be kind of a fun competition. Good find. I like it. That was another good one.
That was Lane's Instagram find of the week, dealing with agriculture, or or what I LOL to. But Russ, in just a few weeks, the crew will be traveling out to Pendleton, Oregon. And no, we're not going to be letting her buck because we're going to be there the week before the Pendleton Roundup, unfortunately. But we will be joining the National Public Lands Council for their 55th annual meeting, September 5th through the 7th, as I mentioned, in Pendleton, Oregon. And recently we caught up with Colorado rancher and president of the Public Lands Council, our friend Mark Rober. And he says one of the issues that will be addressed during this year's event will focus on making improvements to the Endangered Species Act. And Rober made it clear. He said cattle and sheep producers are not against the act itself or the species that it protects, but they are concerned that the government has failed to delist species that are fully recovered and not follow through with the true purpose of the Endangered Species Act.
We all enjoy wildlife. We all enjoy those species, but everything, if we're going to coexist with them, it takes management. And under, current ESA rules, the species takes precedent over everything else. And that is really the rub with ranchers, is we aren't against any of those species. But if they aren't managed properly and we don't have a chance to manage and protect our livelihoods and livestock as well as human beings, I mean, the species, we've had several grizzly bear attacks in the past few months. And I mean, where do we draw that line of when enough is enough? And that really is the rub with the Endangered Species Act. It's not the act itself, it's just how it's being used.
And just to report, there was another grizzly attack in Wyoming this past week as well. But Russell, other top issues that the cattle and sheep producers who will be attending the Public Lands Council meeting there in Pendleton in September will be working on, of course, we've talked about it at great length, the BLM's proposed conservation and landscape health rule, wild horse management, always a hot topic issue, BLM grazing regulations, and so much more. And just for our friends that haven't registered yet or made plans to travel out to Pendleton, you can register today by visiting publiclandscouncil.org. And yeah, it's going to be a great time and a lot of key issues. And of course, those federal lands that ranchers graze on for just a short period of time each year are a big part of the Western United States economy. And those are going to be some of those top issues going on there in Pendleton.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, having the input and the feedback and just the interaction from as many public lands ranchers as possible is what makes the PLC successful, in individual states out here in the West, and certainly all the work and effort that PLC does on a national level out of their office in Washington, D.C. So it is in Pendleton, Oregon. It's not that far away for a lot of folks. And so, power comes in numbers, and it'd sure be nice to see as many public lands ranchers from across the West join us in Pendleton here in just a few weeks.
That's right. Again, visit more online. Just visit Public Lands Council, get registered, and we hope to be seeing you out there in Pendleton here very soon. And hey, Russ, with that, I think we had a great quick recap of just a few of those top headlines that we had on the Western Ag Network this week. And we're going to continue to bring you Fencelines and Headlines episodes throughout the rest of our coverage. I want to say every single Sunday morning, because that's when we air them live. But of course, you can tune in and watch these whenever it tickles your fancy. But we appreciate you joining us here. If you're tuning in during the live broadcast, starting at 7:05 a.m. on Sunday mornings, whether that's Facebook, YouTube, or on the Lanecast Ag podcast platform, we ask one thing: just make sure and subscribe to us on YouTube. Give us a follow and a like on Facebook, and subscribe to the podcast as well. Then you know when these shows are going to be going live. And just remember, 7:05 Mountain Time every Sunday morning, we'll be joining you here on the digital airwaves, I guess, through the ether, if that's what we want to call it. Is that the right way to put it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's you did a very nice job of describing that. And of course, we can't forget to throw out the fact folks can still catch us every single day, several times a day, Monday through Friday on the radio and of course television. We couldn't do the broadcast side of what we do without the support and teamwork from all of our radio and television affiliates across our 8-state coverage area as well.
Well, Russ, thanks for joining us here today, and thanks to our audience. And with that, on behalf of the entire Western Ag Network crew, I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.